Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Satyricon. Before we continue, this is a personalized limited edition of the Satyricon with leather cover, designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself, if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Satyricon, or Satyrica, also subtitled the Book of Satire-like Adventures, is a Roman text from the 1st century AD, written by Petronius, who can be considered an observer and a chronicler of Roman life. And he was also a member of the infamous Roman Emperor Nero's court. Petronius was somewhat of a Roman dandy and enjoyed good life, so I assume a lot of the stories in the book are based on his own experiences and participating observations. He was pretty loose in his behavior and speech and eventually got on the emperor's wrong side, which led him to a suicide, since he knew his life was over, either by his own hand or somebody else's. Everything we know about Petronius comes from Roman historian Tacitus and his work Annals. In it, he presents a nice description of Petronius' suicide, which seemed just a continuation of the way he lived. Yet he did not fling away life with precipitate haste, but having made an incision in his veins, and then, according to his humor, bound them up, he again opened them while he conversed with his friends, not in a serious strain or on topics that might win for him the glory of courage. And he listened to them as they repeated not thoughts on the immortality of the soul or on the theories of philosophers, but light poetry and playful verses. Actually, Satyricon is attributed to Petronius, but there are doubts about who the real author of the text was. But I think it is not really important. Whoever wrote it must have had first-hand experience, maybe not of the exact events described, but the general morality and social norms of the early Roman Empire, which probably was already in the initial stages of decline, spurred by the end of the Republic a few decades earlier. In fact, the transformation from Republic into Empire extended Rome's lifeline by a few hundred years, because it was the Republic that was on an unsustainable trajectory and initialed the decline. I find this time in Roman history to be particularly interesting, since for me the Rome was in a similar place the United States of the 21st century is, politically and morally. What is Satyricon about? It is satirical and also symbolic presentation of the Roman life, shown through the adventures of a young man and his friends, a description of social customs and behaviors presented as personal experiences or retold tales. It has been so long since I promised you the story of my adventures that I have decided to make good on my word today. And seeing that we have thus fortunately met not to discuss scientific matters alone, but also to enliven our jolly conversation with witty stories. A bit of the plot. The plot is the adventures of two young chaps, Encolpius, who is the narrator, and his friend Ascyltos, and a teenage boy named Giton, who is somewhat of their sex toy. Encolpius and Ascyltos also have somewhat of an intimate and carnal relationship, which was not uncommon between the Romans and was a tradition carried on from the Greeks. The story began somewhere in the Roman Greece, where Encolpius is having a debate in front of a school with a sophist about the failures of the educational system and corruption of the young. The same ongoing dilemma still present today. They quote Socrates and Cicero, and one of the debaters says, "No one in his old age will confess the errors he learned in his school days." Encolpius decides to go look for Ascyltos and Giton, but he gets lost and is taken to a brothel by an old woman, where he finds his two friends. there is a constant tension between Encolpius and Ascyltos caused by sexual desire for Giton. So after a mix of fighting and sexual orgy involving female and male prostitutes and a 7-year-old virgin, the two agree that eventually in the future it will be better if they go their separate ways. The second part is called Dinner at Trimalchio's. Trimalchio is a wealthy ex-slave who seems to be trying to make up for his younger years of servitude by being arrogant, vulgar, and nasty. At the dinner, the two friends and Giton enjoy typical Roman overindulgence with a variety of exotic foods, music, dances, talk about everyday life, and listening to some mythical tales. After the party, the three, drunk, get back to their inn, where Encolpius passes out, and Ascyltos has sex with Giton. In the morning, there is another fight, and they decide the time came to part ways. And to dismay of Encolpius, Giton chooses to go with Ascyltos. Later, Encolpius visits an art gallery where he meets an old poet, and they discuss the modern art and how it is not made the way it used to be. After it, Encolpius returns to his lodgings, where, to his surprise, he finds young Giton, who changed his mind about who he preferred in bed. In the next part, Encolpius and Giton, together with the old poet, travel by ship, where, to avoid being seen by certain other passengers, in a somewhat comical gesture, they shave all their hair, including eyebrows. The ship is sunk in the storm, and they find themselves in the city of Cortona, located in the extreme south of Italy. Cortona was founded by the Greeks and is considered one of the oldest cities in Italy. Interestingly, the city had a larger population when it was a Greek colony than it does today. While in the city, the three have more adventures, mostly sexual, where Encolpius considers self-castration when not able to satisfy his female friend. Later, his rectum is almost violated by a sex toy. He kills a sacred goose, and the book ends with a preparation for a cannibal feast. All those who are left legacies in my will obtain my bequests only on one condition, that they cut my body into pieces and eat it before the eyes of the citizens. You must merely shield your eyes and imagine that what you have swallowed is not human entrails, but 10 million sestraces. And that's the basic plot. What are my thoughts about Satyricon? It is somewhat of an incomplete text, with a few parts missing, but I think it gives a good general view of life in the Roman Empire. It can be called Roman decadent literature, but probably the whole Roman Empire could be called decadent and in decline, as opposed to the Republic, which seemingly was more controlled and pragmatic. On the other hand, it was the Republic that by its actions reigned in the empire. I think in general, all empires are decadent and in decline, and that's why they have limited lifespan. Going back to the similarities between the late Roman Republic and early empire and the United States of the 21st century, we could say America, in theory, is still a republic, but in its practical expression, it behaves more like an empire. I think when a nation becomes an empire, it has reached its peak and the slide down begins. Physically, the empire can still be expanding, but socially it is in decline. It is similar to the individuals when they become too big, or more precisely, too fat, which makes them lazy and causes their decline. Anyway, I think the importance of Satyricon lies in its portrayal of Roman life during Nero's rule. It shows that the inhabitants of the empire enjoyed a certain amount of freedom, and reading that text, it wasn't only physical, but also in their verbal and artistic expression, as opposed to the later medieval Europe. The book shows the Roman society as liberal, and because of it, somewhat perverse and uncontrolled, with plenty of promiscuity, debauchery, homosexuality, and constant sexual games. I wonder how much of it was influenced by the Emperor Nero himself, or he was just a product of his times. Nero was a symbol of the Roman insanity. He supposedly set Rome on fire so it could serve as a dramatic background for his poetic recital, and then blamed the Christians for it and fed them to the lions. It is all nicely described in a famous novel, Quo Vadis, where Petronius is one of the main characters and, as in real life, commits suicide. Satyricon shows the flexibility, mobility, and opportunity of the Roman class system when looking at and comparing it to its successor state, the Holy Roman Empire, and in general the latter European society under Christianity, with its extensive and strictly controlled list of noble titles. Trimalchio is a good example of it. He is what today we could call nouveau riche or new money, insecure, uneducated, and lacking good taste and manners. There have been plenty of them around in recent history. The only thing that changes is ethnicity. There were the Gulf state Arabs, then Russians, and now maybe Chinese. Every time some poor country's fortunes change for the better, the unfortunate byproduct of it are masses of loud, ostentatious, and obnoxious individuals overrunning the world, at least the good parts of it. Trimalchio began as a slave, but because of his loyalty and probably some luck, he became a free and a wealthy man and a slave owner himself, and also his wife, who he bought at a slave market and transformed her into an upper-class woman. The whole Roman institution of slavery was much broader because it was not based on race, and because of it, it was a lot more flexible and open than the slavery during Christianity. Further, Dinner at Trimalchio's is a portrayal of the Roman exaggeration, overindulgence, immorality, according to our standards, and general appreciation of excess. But there are also descriptions of the Roman culinary and eating habits with preferences for some strange dishes and habitual conversation, for example, displaying dishes on a zodiac sign plates and discussing what kind of a person it represented and who would eat it. And also there were the music and dances that went with the feasting. The plot takes place far from Rome itself, Greece and extreme end of Italy, maybe to show that the Sin City wasn't only Rome but the whole empire, and probably for Petronius, the customs and habits he describes were not considered abnormal nor perverse, but reflected the general behavior of the citizens and residents of the Roman Empire. However, Satyricon is a satire, and all satire is indirect criticism. We trained hard, but it seemed that every time we were beginning to form up into teams, we were reorganized. I was to learn later in life that we tend to meet any new situation by reorganizing, and what a wonderful method it can be for creating the illusion of progress while actually producing confusion, inefficiency, and demoralization. Petronius seemed to enjoy Rome's festive mood and debauchery, but he was also an intelligent and keen observer and probably envisioned where the whole spectacle was heading. He was critical of the society's obvious hypocrisy. Nothing is falser than people's preconceptions and ready-made opinions. Nothing is sillier than their sham morality. And he also saw through the corrupt system, and on top of it, he voiced his opinion about it. What power has law where only money rules? So the system decided he was dangerous and had to be eliminated, and it killed him in a Socratic-like style, converting him into his own executioner. To sum it up, Satyricon is a good view into Roman life of the 1st century AD, Rome not as a place, but Rome as a society. Romans seem to want, above all, to enjoy their lives, It was a period before the arrival of Christianity and the popularity of self-sacrificing and suffering. The protagonists of the novel don't seem very different from the young people today, wanting to have fun and blowing their money with the girls and with young boys, and also dreaming about getting out of poverty. Satyricon is considered by some a first novel, and it feels a bit like it when reading it. I wonder how much the translation from Latin influenced it, and if the context is correctly relayed. Perhaps the complete work had a broader purpose, which we miss because of the missing and fragmented text. And the fine details are, so to say, lost in translation. Maybe Petronius wanted to be vague, perhaps to protect himself, and he might have given us a subtle hint in this quote. Everyone will find what he is looking for. Nothing pleases everyone. This man gathers thorns, that one roses. He seemed to want Satyricon to be very subjective, and the missing text, ironically, makes it even more so. Further, Petronius makes references to Ulysses in the text, and perhaps Satyricon was intended as a parody or a twist on the Odyssey, a journey to find some abstract idea of home as opposed to return to one's physical house. Maybe it was no coincidence that plot starts in Greece, since Petronius wanted to show how much further into moral corruption and perversion the Romans drifted compared to the Greeks. What made me think about it was a story of a young widow willing to die next to her dead husband, but in the end allowing herself to be seduced by a young soldier, thus choosing immoral life over honorable death. It is better to hang your dead husband than to lose a live lover. Also, when Encolpius visits the art gallery, the old poet complains that the paintings are not made anymore with the perfectionism of the old masters, kind of like our modern art. You throw some against the wall and go with what sticks. The word sincere comes from that time. It means in Latin without wax. The sculptors in the old days would abandon a piece if it cracked and start all over with a new stone. But around the time of Petronius, they started to fill the cracks with wax to disguise the imperfections. So sincere or without wax started to mean honest. Further, the book's decadent style made me think of the decadent movement in the 19th century France and the book Against Nature by Karol Joris-Huysman. I remember the book's protagonist, Jean de Sons, saying he preferred much more Petronius to classical Greek and Roman writers. And Petronius, for many decadent artists, was an inspiration as a symbol of the Rome's decadence. There is an excellent 1960s adaptation of Satyricon into film by the great Italian director Federico Fellini. It is loosely based on the book's plot, but the visuals and the general feeling of the place is superbly transmitted. I have seen it a few times, and it is an enjoyable experience every time. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tanner in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, which what I did here, I took this illustration of a Roman feast with the musicians and dancers entertaining the guests, who are lying down around the plates filled with food, conversing and being served on by slaves, some pretty young, and the scene reminded me of the dinner at Trimalchio's. This is the bag with the blurb, and inside the front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather-bound hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $150, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations, I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So, if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture, it smells great, and the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it, so let's end it here. And until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.